The road up to the fire watch station was always rough this time of year. Washed out gravel from spring runoff, deep ruts from the supply truck that only came twice a month. The tires on my Jeep caught on the edge of one of them, and for a second I felt the whole chassis jolt sideways. I corrected and kept going. The trees pressed in close up here, all black spruce and jack pine, dense and unwelcoming. The air had that cold moss smell I remembered from training rotations, thick with sap and decay. It had been 4 years since I was last assigned to North Tower. Back then, I was just shadowing Clyde. He was a quiet old bastard with a crooked back and a voice like sandpaper. Smoked indoors when nobody was watching, kept his sidearm loaded even though it was against regulation, and muttered to himself when he thought I couldn't hear. I crested the last incline and saw the tower through the trees, thin, metal-framed, and older than I remembered. It rose like a skeletal finger above the canopy, a rusty outline against the late afternoon sky. Clyde's truck was still parked near the concrete base, right where he said it'd be. He'd retired last week, but he was staying behind a few extra days to show me the ropes again. He was sitting on the porch when I pulled up, legs outstretched, puffing on one of those awful little cigars that smelled like oil-soaked cardboard. He didn't wave. "Figured you'd take your time," he rasped, teeth clenched on the stub. I smiled. Didn't want to break an axle. He stood with a grunt and flicked the cigar into the dirt. His eyes were red-rimmed from the smoke, or maybe just time. He looked worse than I remembered, more hollowed out. His ranger shirt was loose, like he'd shrunk inside it. "You still carry a map?" he asked. "In my pack. GPS too." "Don't use the GPS after sundown," he said. "Trails up here don't play nice at night." I raised an eyebrow. "What, do you think the trees move around?" He didn't laugh. We spent the next few hours hauling my gear up the tower and doing a quick inventory of the supplies. Freeze-dried meals, lanterns, fresh water, spare batteries. Everything looked in order. Clyde moved slower than before, favoring one leg, but his mind was sharp. He pointed out the new antenna rig and showed me where the wildlife logs were kept. "Nothing strange on the radios," he said. "No flare reports in over 6 months." This place was quiet. When the sun dipped behind the western ridge, he stood near the railing and lit another cigar, watching the tree line below like it might shift if he blinked. "You still got your sidearm?" "Of course. You keep it loaded?" I nodded. He exhaled smoke through his nose. "Then listen close, because I'm only going to say it once." I leaned against the railing, waiting for the joke. It didn't come. "If you ever see someone in the trees," he said slowly, "and their arms don't bend when they move, don't speak, don't wave. Don't go down there." I blinked. "What?" He looked at me, really looked. His eyes were sharp now, alert. "You'll know it when you see it. They walk stiff, straight arms, no swing, elbows locked, like they forgot how to be human." I couldn't help it. I grinned. "Come on, Clyde, you telling me ghost stories now?" He didn't smile back. "Ain't a ghost, not like that." "Then what is it?" "I don't know," he said, dragging on the cigar. "But it's not right. Some nights you'll hear footsteps outside, slow and even, real slow. Just don't acknowledge it. Stay up here. Don't shine your light on it." I stared at him. "Are you serious?" He didn't answer right away, just ground the cigar out on the railing and looked back toward the trees. "I made it 36 years out here," he said. "Don't break my streak." We didn't talk much after that. He left the next morning at dawn. No handshake, no goodbye, just the sound of his truck grumbling down the hill and vanishing into the tree line. I stood at the top of the stairs and watched the dust settle behind him. The days passed slow after that. I spent most of them doing recon runs, checking the watch trails, logging bird calls, setting up new camera traps along the ridge. The station had no cell signal and spotty radio, but that was part of the draw. No people, no chatter, just me in the woods. The air stayed cool during the day and dropped like a stone at night. The wind-up here always carried something behind it, distant snapping, creaks, and rustling that might have been animals but always felt slower, more deliberate. I blamed it on old lumber. This whole place groaned like it was tired of being remembered. I sat out on the catwalk most nights, wrapped in my ranger jacket, watching the moon slide between clouds. That first week, nothing really happened. I wrote up reports, filed inventory, marked trail damage from the spring thaw, but I kept thinking about what Clyde said, about the stiff-armed walker. It was a ridiculous image, someone lurching through the trees with their arms stuck straight down, like they were wearing a brace. I thought about texting my old partner, Jess, just to tell her what Clyde said. She would have gotten a kick out of it. But every time I pulled out the satellite phone, I found myself hesitating. It felt stupid to admit how many times I'd replayed the conversation, how many times I'd stood at the railing after dark, just watching. 3 nights in, I heard the footsteps. I was in bed, not asleep, just reading with a headlamp on low. The tower creaked around me as usual, but underneath it I caught something different, a pattern. Crunch, pause, crunch, pause. I clicked off the light. It kept going, 1 step every few seconds. The sound was far below, maybe near the gravel loop where Clyde had parked. I waited, counting the spaces between steps. There was no shuffle, no stagger, just slow, measured progress, not animal pacing, not the stuttered path of a drunk or the rustle of someone trying to sneak. I stayed in bed, barely breathing, listening until the sound stopped. No retreat, no shift in direction, just stopped. When I looked out the next morning, there was nothing. No prints, no signs of anything unusual. I convinced myself it was a bear, maybe an elk, something heavy and slow. But that afternoon, I checked the brush near the base of the stairs and found no tracks at all. The gravel was undisturbed. By nightfall, I was on edge. I kept my radio clipped to my belt and my sidearm closer than usual. I told myself it was just the isolation getting to me. Too many long days without another voice, too much silence echoing back. But I didn't turn in early that night. I waited until midnight, then made coffee and sat on the catwalk, watching. The forest below looked silver in the moonlight, all sharp edges and flickering movement. The wind stirred the treetops. Every so often I swore I saw something shifting at the edge of the clearing. But when I focused on it, it was gone. Then the footsteps started again. Same rhythm, same slow, steady cadence. I couldn't tell where they were coming from. Sounded like they moved just out of view, circling the base of the tower. I stood, leaned over the railing and tried to spot movement. Nothing. They stopped after maybe a minute, then silence again. The next morning I radioed in a wildlife disturbance report. Didn't mention the footsteps, didn't mention Clyde's warning either. I wasn't ready to sound like the new guy who spooked himself over a ghost story, but I carried the sidearm on me constantly after that, even in the tower. That afternoon, as I was cleaning out the observation binos, I noticed something on the edge of the ridge trail. A branch bent forward, like it had been pulled down and snapped back. Not unusual, but right below it, there was a patch of flattened moss, a footprint. It wasn't deep. The moss had rebounded some, but I could still see the edges. It looked human, only it was too neat. No heel-toe gradient, no shift in weight, just a perfect oval, like someone had pressed their foot down flat, then lifted it cleanly away. I didn't sleep that night. The wind picked up around 2 a.m., rattling the windows. I could hear it groaning through the metal braces outside, that hollow steel hum that always sounded like it was rising towards something. I stayed up, walking from one end of the tower to the other, shining my light out into the woods. The radio hissed faintly behind me. No footsteps that time, but I could feel it, the sense that something was waiting out there, watching, not approaching, not yet, just learning the shape of me. By the end of the week, I stopped laughing about Clyde's warning. The morning after the second round of footsteps, I went looking. There was no protocol for it, not really. If you suspected a prowler or potential trespasser, you were supposed to notify base and wait for backup before investigating. But out here, backup meant 2 hours minimum, assuming someone was listening at the relay outpost in Nelson Creek. And even if they were, they'd have to get past the washed-out roads, the narrow switchbacks, and the brush that hadn't been cleared since early spring. I wasn't waiting. I took the western trailhead down into the tree line, boots crunching over frost-crisped needles. The sun had only just come up, threading through the trees in long, cold shafts. My breath fogged in front of me as I moved. I didn't really know what I was looking for. Tracks, maybe. Drag marks. Anything that might confirm what I'd heard. For the first mile, the trail looked normal. Twigs, leaf litter, faint deer tracks near a shallow runoff creek. But then, halfway down the slope, I found something that stopped me cold. A tree, tall and old, its bark split wide like something had clawed through it. 4 deep gouges, not just scratches. Long, deliberate, running from shoulder height all the way down to the roots. The kind of damage that didn't come from age or storms. I crouched and ran my fingers along one of the grooves. The edges were clean, fresh, sap still weeping in slow rivulets. I looked around, expecting to hear something crashing through the undergrowth, but the forest was still, too still. I stood and circled the tree, checking for prints or scat. Nothing, just those 4 gouges, almost parallel, evenly spaced. No bear I'd ever tracked did that. No cougar either. Claws don't land that clean. They twist, rake, break bark sideways. This looked mechanical, intentional. I marked the spot on my notepad and continued downhill. An hour into the hike, I started getting the feeling I wasn't alone. You learn to tune that instinct out in this job. Your brain plays tricks. Shadows between trees, the flick of a squirrel tail mistaken for something larger. But this didn't feel like that. It felt like something was watching. I stopped by a crooked pine and stood there a while, just listening. Wind, mostly. The soft sway of high branches. A few distant creaks, nothing else. I turned back toward the trail, and that's when I saw it. At first, I thought it was a snag, a dark shape partway up the hill, caught between the trees. But then it shifted. It didn't move fast. It didn't duck or run or flinch. It just adjusted. Like it had been standing still and decided to lean slightly, as if listening. It was shaped like a man, broad in the shoulders, tall, but wrong in a way I couldn't immediately place. Its outline didn't match the light. No texture, no glint of fabric. Just a matte silhouette against the green. I couldn't see its face. Couldn't see its eyes, and its arms were hanging too straight. Not just at its sides, perfectly vertical. No bend at the elbow, no natural angle in the joints, like broom handles dangling from the shoulders. I blinked. It was gone, not moved, not fled, just gone. No rustle, no crunch. Nothing. I stared at the spot for a full minute. Then I turned and headed back up the trail. About halfway up, I heard the first snap behind me. Light, deliberate, a twig, crushed just after I passed. I stopped, heart ticking in my chest, and looked back down the trail, empty. But the forest had gone quiet again. No birds, no insects, even the breeze seemed to pause. I picked up my pace. Every 20 or 30 steps, I heard it again, a snap, a crackle, not quite matching my rhythm. Always behind me, just enough to let me know it was there. I didn't run. That's something Clyde told me during my first week shadowing him. Don't run. Don't ever run in the woods. You lose your sense of direction. You miss signs. You panic. But I didn't walk slow either. By the time I saw the tower again, I was nearly breathless. The base appeared through the trees like a promise. The thin glint of steel struts. The silhouette of the cabin above. I forced myself not to sprint. At the top, I slammed the hatch shut and locked it. The metal groaned but held. I waited up there for hours, eyes scanning the clearing through binoculars. Nothing moved. The trees stood still. My hands were cold and stiff from gripping the rail. By late afternoon, the birds came back. I heard a woodpecker off to the south. A chickadee called near the feeder. Things returned to normal, at least on the surface. But that night, I triple-checked the locks. I started logging everything in a green-bound field notebook I found in one of the drawers. Not official reports, just thoughts, timestamps, sketches. I wrote about the claw marks, the vanishing figure, the footsteps behind me. I drew a little map of where I'd seen it, circled the tree. I wrote the words "no elbows" in the margin and underlined them twice. I stayed in the tower for the next 2 days, logged weather patterns, watched for smoke columns, took photos of the southern ridges. I told myself the isolation had gotten to me, that I needed more rest, that maybe Clyde had planted the idea in my head and I was just seeing shapes in the woods. Then the footsteps came back. I was writing in the logbook when they started. Slow, steady, same as before. I turned off the lantern and stood by the window. The clearing below was bathed in moonlight again, sharp and silver, almost bright enough to read by. I leaned against the glass, listening. Crunch, pause, crunch. This time I could tell. The steps were circling the base, once around, then again. I stayed silent. I didn't shine the flashlight, didn't call out. On the third pass, they stopped. I waited a full 15 minutes, unmoving. When nothing else came, I returned to the logbook and wrote one sentence: "It knows I'm here." The next morning, I made another sweep. Not a long one, just down to the base and around the clearing's edge. I didn't find tracks, but the feeder had been knocked over. Not clawed or gnawed, just knocked, like someone had bumped it with their shoulder. The birdseed was scattered across the grass in a neat fan. I righted the feeder and checked the wire, intact. No sign of teeth or claws, no feathers or fur nearby. But 30 feet from the feeder, near the shadow of the tower's stairwell, I found something else. A small pile of stones, 6 or 7 flat ones, stacked neatly on top of each other like a cairn. Not unusual for hikers, but no one was supposed to be up here. And these weren't trail markers. They were arranged in a perfect spiral, top stone balanced on edge. It hadn't been there yesterday. I didn't touch it, just stood and stared, waiting for something to move in the tree line. Nothing did. Back inside, I shut the windows and drew the curtains. I kept the lights off after dark. I started talking to myself more, not muttering, not unraveling, just filling space. The kind of conversation you have with your own shadow to keep it from wandering too far. That night, I tried something different. I set my recorder on the windowsill and let it run. No light, no sound, just 30 minutes of tape pointed toward the trees. When I played it back the next morning, I heard nothing for the first 5 minutes. Then the wind, a faint rustle, the creak of the tower frame, and then footsteps, exactly like I'd heard them. But what got me wasn't the sound, it was the timing. The recorder had captured 10 steps, then silence, then 10 more, not 11, not 9, 10. Exactly, like it was counting. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. I went to the map cabinet and pulled the old Ranger logs, flipping through until I found the logs from 1991, Clyde's early years. They were mostly weather notes, animal sightings, routine stuff. But in the margins of the July log, I found 3 words in pencil. He walks even. The writing wasn't Clyde's. It was tighter, neater, someone else. I closed the drawer and didn't open it again that day. The following afternoon, I climbed up to the highest point on the roof, the little crow's nest where we sometimes mounted the old VHF scanner, and scanned the treetops with binoculars. I don't know what I was hoping for. Maybe to see something moving, maybe to confirm I'd imagined it all. I spotted nothing unusual at first. Then, just before I lowered the lenses, I caught a shape again, deep in the trees, half obscured by branches. Far too far to make out detail, but it was standing still, no movement, no shift in posture, just there. I focused harder. It was gone again. I waited, watched the spot for a full hour. Nothing returned. The sun began to set, and I realized I hadn't eaten since breakfast. I made some powdered soup, sat by the window with it, and didn't turn the radio on. The air outside grew darker. No clouds, just a pale half-moon rising over the tree line, throwing thin shadows through the tower railings. Around midnight, the floor creaked under me, not from footsteps, just the natural sway of the tower and the wind. But I noticed something else, a faint sound, even quieter than the steps. Breathing, not mine. It came from below. I didn't move for a long time. The breathing below the tower was faint, uneven, like someone trying to pace their own inhale to stay silent. Every time I strained my ears, it paused. When I eased back, it resumed, quiet and shallow. I went for my flashlight, but I didn't flick it on. Instead, I crouched by the window, trying to catch any glint of movement below. Nothing. Just pale moonlight slicing across the clearing and the black outline of the stairs. I waited. The breathing stopped. I thought I might be imagining it, some resonance of wind through the metal grating. I almost believed that, until the footsteps started again. They weren't circling this time. They were moving in a straight line, closer, crunch, pause, crunch. I stayed crouched by the window, my knuckles white around the flashlight. I could hear my own pulse in my ears. Then I saw it, just barely, a shape slipping between the trees at the edge of the clearing, tall and deliberate. It walked with a stiffness that made my stomach twist. Its arms hung like sticks, no swing, no bend. Each step planted straight down like a metronome counting time. I thought about Clyde's words, "Don't acknowledge it." I ducked away from the window and crouched lower, letting the darkness swallow me. The steps reached the base of the tower. Then silence. I held my breath. Nothing. No scraping of metal on the stairs. No sound of movement. Just a stillness that pressed in all around. I didn't dare look again. I waited there until my legs cramped and my back ached, and only when dawn light began to seep through the treetops did I move. I slept for an hour on the floor, fully dressed and clutching the flashlight. When I woke, the clearing was empty. I told myself I needed evidence, something concrete to prove I wasn't slipping. So I spent the day methodically documenting everything. I wrote down times. I sketched the tower layout. I marked the direction the figure had come from on a rough map. Then, as the sun rose higher, I headed down the trails again. I followed the same path as before, west along the slope, checking for signs. At first, I found nothing. Just dew on needles, a few deer tracks crossing through a low patch of ferns. But then I saw them. Footprints. Not clear shoe prints, but depressions, perfectly shaped, evenly spaced, like someone had pressed their feet into the ground with mechanical precision. They led from the tree line toward the clearing, stopping a few yards short of the tower's base. The moss around them was crushed flat, and in one spot I thought I saw a faint smear like something dragging. I bent low, inspecting. No tread, no heel pattern. Just flat ovals. The longer I looked, the more wrong they felt. It was like someone had sculpted the idea of a footprint without ever having walked. Each one was identical. I followed them back into the woods. About 30 yards in, they simply stopped. No signs of turning or veering off, just gone. I felt eyes on me then, deep in the trees somewhere I couldn't see. I straightened and scanned the undergrowth, but the woods looked empty. The silence returned. I backed out, slow and steady, my hand resting on the grip of my sidearm. That evening, I decided I needed a record, something better than sketches and notes. I set up the old trail binoculars on the catwalk, pointed them toward the clearing, and waited as the sky turned orange, then deep blue. Night came fast. The forest swallowed the last light, and the tower lights flickered on. I made myself a stale cup of coffee and sat by the window. Around midnight, I saw movement. Not fast, just a subtle shift at the far edge of the trees. I raised the binoculars and focused. There it was, tall, black against the pale trunks, motionless. Its arms still hung stiff at its sides. Even at a distance, I could see they didn't bend. No angles at all, just straight lines from shoulder to fingertip. It took a single step forward. I froze, watching through the lenses, afraid to even blink. Another step, and another, slow, deliberate, like each footfall was placed with purpose. I lowered the binoculars to confirm what I saw. It was still there, closer now. I wanted to reach for the radio to call it in, but something in me said no. Clyde's warning rattled in my head. Don't acknowledge it. What did that even mean? Did turning on the radio count? Did looking count? I stood there in silence, gripping the binoculars so tightly my hands hurt. The figure stopped just inside the tree line. It tilted its head, not much, just slightly, like a question. I couldn't see its face, but I felt the weight of its attention. Then, slowly, it looked up, right at me. A chill slid down my spine, as if the temperature had dropped 10 degrees all at once. I stepped back from the window, heart hammering. I didn't know why, but I felt like if I stayed in its line of sight, something bad would happen, something irreversible. I crouched low and crawled across the floor, away from the window. I sat with my back against the far wall, staring at the door. I stayed like that for nearly an hour, waiting, listening. At some point I realized I hadn't heard a single step. No approach, no retreat, nothing. I crawled back to the window and peered out. The clearing was empty. I barely slept that night. Every creak of the tower frame made my pulse jump. Every shift of wind against the glass sounded like footsteps. The next morning, I found something new. At the base of the tower stairs, pressed into the damp soil, were those same flat oval impressions. Fresh. I didn't see the figure again that day, but I felt its presence. Every time I looked out the window, I expected to see it at the tree line, standing and watching. That night, I left all the lights off and sat in the dark. I wanted to know if it would come back when I wasn't visible. The footsteps began just after 1 a.m. This time, they didn't just circle. They came closer, gravel crunching, one slow step at a time toward the base of the stairs. I stayed perfectly still, every muscle locked. The steps stopped. Then, after a long, tense silence, I heard something else, a faint creak, the sound of weight settling on the first step. I sat frozen on the floor, staring at the hatch above the stairwell. The creak had been faint, but I knew what I'd heard, metal shifting under weight. The steps to the tower were narrow and groaned even under my own boots. That sound didn't lie, but it didn't continue. No second step, no rhythm of ascent. Just one single shift, and then stillness again. I stayed curled in the shadows until dawn broke, gray and listless. The sky outside looked bruised, the clouds sagging low over the trees. When I finally summoned the nerve to lift the trapdoor and peer down the stairwell, it was empty. Nothing moved in the clearing, no sign of intrusion, and yet the air smelled different, faintly metallic, like rust or wet coins. I checked the bolts on the tower's base hatch, still locked. I paced the cabin for nearly an hour, trying to make sense of it, but every explanation fell apart under scrutiny. Wind? Animals? None of it made sense with the precision of the steps or the timing. I switched on the shortwave to log a disturbance report and call Nelson Creek. Static. I reset the tuner, flipped through all the emergency channels. Still nothing but a low hiss. I pulled the power, reconnected, and waited through the boot cycle. Nothing. The backup VHF unit, same thing, no signal. I checked the battery pack, still fully charged. Only then did it occur to me to look out the window at the radio antenna on the far side of the clearing. It was gone. I stared, blinking through the hazy morning light, trying to register what I was seeing. The antenna pole, which had stood anchored to a heavy concrete base with steel cable tethers, was no longer there. The base remained, but the pole itself had been pulled clean away. The bolts snapped at the collar mount. Not cut, not broken in wind. Yanked. I grabbed my pack, sidearm, and utility knife and headed down the tower, boots hitting each metal rung with more force than necessary. My nerves were taut. Every shadow in the woods felt sharper now. Every rustle sent my head snapping around. When I reached the clearing, I found the antenna 20 feet away, discarded in a bed of pine needles like a dropped toy. The cables had been ripped from their housing with such force that one of them had coiled around a nearby stump like a snake. No animal did this. I crouched beside the base and examined the bolts. One had snapped, the thread peeled like a corkscrew. The others were simply gone. pulled free with their heads sheared off. That kind of leverage takes a winch. Or hands. I turned and scanned the woods. Nothing. I hiked east toward the backup supply shed, following the ridge trail. It was a 3-mile round trip and I jogged most of it, breath puffing in the morning cold. I told myself I'd radio Nelson Creek from the spare unit there, maybe even get the old repeater back online. The shed sat in a clearing where the tree line receded slightly, a low concrete structure with a metal roof and 2 padlocked doors. The lock was intact. I entered, flipped on the light, and walked straight to the radio rack mounted on the back wall. Dead. I checked the breakers. Fine. The panel light glowed faintly green. I tested the mic and keyed it once. Silence. No hum. No flicker on the signal display. Then I noticed the antenna cable leading out through the rear wall had been pulled taut. Too taut. It didn't sag as it should have. It stretched like it was being dragged. I followed it outside and around the back of the shed. The antenna tower here was bent at a perfect 45-degree angle, the top wedged into the earth. Not collapsed, not toppled, bent, as if someone had grabbed it mid-height and leaned until it gave. Below it, the soil was disturbed, 2 long furrows like something had stood bracing both feet while it pulled. I took 3 steps back, heart pounding. That's when I saw them. Near the edge of the clearing, those same oval impressions, the 2 perfect footprints, flat, symmetrical, like a stencil pressed into the moss. I didn't approach them. I didn't touch anything. I turned and walked fast. Then I jogged. Then I ran. When I reached the tower again, I was breathless and covered in sweat. My lungs burned. I climbed the stairs 2 at a time, slammed the hatch shut behind me, and bolted it. I spent the next hour just sitting on the floor, my back to the wall, listening. The wind had picked up again, whistling between the boards like a breath held too long. By early afternoon, the woods had gone quiet again. Not the peaceful quiet of nature at rest. No, this was the kind that rang in your ears. No birdsong, no chirping insects, no rustling leaves, just dead air and the faint hum of anxiety in my chest. I turned the tower radio back on, still static. I switched to the weather band, hoping to hear even a faint signal, something automated. Nothing. Later, as dusk crept in, I finally stood. I made a full loop around the catwalk, watching the tree line. At the northern edge of the clearing, just as the last light dropped below the trees, I thought I saw something. Movement. A flicker of black between the trunks. Then, a sound. Different this time. Not footsteps, not breathing. A tap, sharp, measured, from the base of the tower. It came again, and again. 3 taps. I moved back inside, locked the door, and turned off all the lights. The tapping resumed. It wasn't frantic. It wasn't even rhythmic. It was purposeful. Tap, tap, tap. I sat on the floor again, back against the stove, and watched the door across the cabin. The noise came from directly beneath it, on the metal surface of the hatch below the stairs. I waited. The taps stopped. Then silence. I didn't sleep that night. Just sat with my notebook in my lap, pen idle, pages blank. I didn't write anything. Around 3 in the morning, I got up and approached the window. I peeled back one edge of the curtain and looked out. The clearing was empty, but pressed into the dirt, illuminated faintly by the moon, were 2 rows of perfect oval prints leading directly up to the base of the tower. No others leading away. I didn't blink. I didn't breathe. Something had come right up to the door. Something had stood there listening, watching. I shut the curtain and sat back down. In the morning, the prints were gone. The dirt near the base had been disturbed, like someone had smoothed it over with a branch or their hand. I went down and studied it closely. The marks weren't natural. They were too uniform, like someone had erased them. I walked the edge of the clearing and found no more signs, no drag marks, no snapped twigs, no further footprints. That's when I noticed something in the corner of my vision, something high in one of the trees, maybe 30 feet up. Fabric. I stared. It was a piece of cloth, pale brown, caught on a branch. I climbed the nearest trunk and managed to reach it with my knife. When I pulled it free, my chest went cold. It was a torn shoulder patch, old, sun-bleached, but unmistakable. A ranger insignia, the kind issued more than 20 years ago. Stained, torn down the seam. I climbed back down, breath ragged. I turned in a full circle, scanning the treetops. The forest stood silent. I pocketed the patch and returned to the tower, hands shaking. That night I didn't wait by the window. I turned off every light. I sat at the base of the ladder with my back against the hatch, flashlight in one hand, knife in the other. I thought about Clyde. What did he see out here? How long had he known? The radio remained dead. The woods remained still. But at exactly 2:37 a.m., something tapped the hatch again. 3 times, then silence. I told myself I would sleep that morning, after the tapping, after the footsteps, after the second antenna pulled down. I told myself I would just rest for an hour, 2 at most, just to reset. I barricaded the hatch again, shoved the heavy storage bin over it, and lay down fully clothed on top of my sleeping bag. I don't think I ever actually slept. I just drifted into something that wasn't quite rest, more like waiting with my eyes closed. By late morning, the light through the window had turned the interior of the cabin a muted yellow. It should have felt comforting, safe. It didn't. The forest outside was dead quiet again. The kind of quiet that makes you realize how much background noise you rely on to stay sane. No birds, no squirrels, not even the wind. The trees were statues, frozen mid-motion, like something had pressed pause on the entire world outside the clearing. I ate a protein bar without tasting it, drank warm bitter water from a jug I'd meant to chill the day before. My movements felt mechanical, distant, like I was watching myself from a few feet behind. Around noon, I told myself I'd take another hike, not to escape, not yet, just to clear my head, reassert some sense of control. I had maps, I had a compass, and I still believed that logic could save me if I leaned hard enough into it. I picked the northern trail this time, moving slowly, quietly, eyes scanning every tree trunk and root tangle like I expected one of them to twitch. About a mile in, I found the first piece of fabric. It was wedged in a knot of branches, torn and sun-bleached. I stepped off the trail to inspect it. A scrap of dark brown cloth, heavy-duty, frayed along one edge. Ranger issue, the same kind of material my own pants were made from. I looked up and saw another piece, higher in the branches, this one fluttering faintly in the still air, as if it had been placed there recently. I kept moving, bushwhacking through undergrowth, following a vague path of disturbance. Twigs broken in half, shallow impressions in the moss, bits of fabric caught on bark. It led me to a clearing I didn't recognize. It wasn't marked on my map. There was no trailhead or signpost, just a circular patch of flattened grass and trees that seemed older than the rest, their trunks gnarled and bent as if they'd grown to avoid something. Near the center of the clearing was a hollow tree, a big one, split at the base, dark inside. I stood a few feet away, listening. Nothing. I stepped closer, every instinct in me screaming to stop. But I had to know. Inside the hollow was a shoe, old, torn, caked in dirt, still had laces, one of them looped and caught on a root. Beside it, half buried in loose soil, was something pale, bone. I dropped to one knee and brushed the dirt away. A humerus snapped clean near the center. But what stopped me cold was the shape. There was no joint, no clear elbow socket, no groove where the ulna or radius would have attached, just a long, smooth bone with no clear articulation point. I stepped back, almost tripping over my own boots. My thoughts raced. Animals can't do that. Weather doesn't break bones like that. Even time doesn't erase anatomy so cleanly. Someone had this done to them. Someone human. I looked around the clearing again and noticed a third piece of fabric, this one barely peeking out from under a rock. I lifted it. A partial name tag. The lettering was mostly worn away, but I could still make out the last 3 letters, DGE. I didn't recognize the name, but that didn't matter. I knew what it meant. I wasn't the first one out here. Clyde had known. That old patch I found in the tree, the warning he gave me, he hadn't been joking. He hadn't been trying to scare me. He was trying to tell me what to expect. I backed out of the clearing slowly, trying to keep my bearings. I wasn't even pretending to track now. I just wanted out. The trail felt further away than it should have. The trees seemed to press in closer with each step, their trunks leaning, branches reaching lower. I heard a snap behind me. I spun. Nothing. I didn't run, but I moved faster than I should have. My breathing was shallow, my vision narrowed. When I finally reached the main trail again, I nearly collapsed. I didn't look back, just walked in a straight line, head down, trying not to think about the bone, the lack of a joint, the way that hollow tree looked like it had teeth. Back at the tower, I climbed up without stopping, bolted the hatch and turned on every light. The radio still didn't work. I sat in the corner of the cabin with the name tag in my hand for a long time. I didn't write in the logbook. I didn't draw a map. What was the point? It was real, all of it. I watched the trees until dusk fell, and when the darkness settled again, I waited. The footsteps didn't come that night. There were no taps, no creaks, just silence, which somehow felt worse. I stayed awake until almost 4 a.m., eyes wide in the dark, hands resting on my sidearm. I thought about Clyde again, about the way he looked when he warned me, about how quiet he'd gotten afterward. He'd seen it too, probably more than once, and he'd stayed here anyway, for years. Did he think he was safe if he didn't acknowledge it? Did that work for him, or had he just gotten lucky? Around 5 a.m., I finally dozed off in the chair by the stove. When I woke, the sky was pale and the air felt heavier than before. My limbs ached like I'd been clenching all night. I went back down into the clearing. The footprints had returned, perfect, oval, fresh, leading from the woods, stopping 20 feet from the tower, then vanishing. I followed them a short way into the trees just to confirm. They led to the same bent pine where I'd first seen the shape watching me. I turned around and headed back up. I didn't want to be in the woods anymore. I didn't even want to be on the ground. I shut the hatch and sat by the window again, looking, always looking. The forest wasn't empty. I knew that now. It was watching, waiting. And somewhere beneath all that stillness, something walked without bending. I started watching the woods with binoculars every day, like it was a job all its own. I tracked wind shifts, cloud cover, the shadows under the trees, but mostly I watched for movement. I didn't want to see it again, not really, but something deeper than fear had taken root. Compulsion, maybe, like if I just looked long enough I'd understand something, or see a weakness, or catch it in a lie. It didn't come back right away. Not the way it had before. The nights were still, the tower silent. I should have been grateful, but that absence felt worse than the tapping. I began measuring time in absence. No footprints today. No taps tonight. No sign of anything at all. The quiet began to stretch between my ribs like wires pulled too tight. I stopped trusting it. That morning was the first time I saw it in full daylight. I was out checking the rain gauge along the southern loop, about half a mile from the tower. I hadn't planned to go far, just stretch the legs, get some sun. I kept my eyes down, checking for signs, scat, tracks, broken brush. When I looked up, it was already there, standing in the middle of the trail. It was at least 30 yards ahead, backlit by streaks of sun through the trees, but unmistakable. The same silhouette, tall, unmoving. Its arms dangled straight at its sides, too straight, as if hanging from nails instead of joints. The fingers didn't twitch. The head was bowed slightly, chin dipped too far down to see the face. It stood like someone waiting in line, patient, still, silent. I froze. I didn't speak, didn't move, just stared. Its arms. They swayed very faintly in the breeze, but not from its own motion. There was no bend, no break in the lines. They shifted like wooden planks. The longer I stared, the more the air around it felt thick, like the forest had paused for this moment. Then I blinked, and it was gone. I hadn't moved. I swear I hadn't. Just blinked. Half a second, maybe. It didn't run. It didn't turn. It simply wasn't there anymore. I stood in place for a long time, scanning the trail, waiting to see it reappear. But the path ahead was empty. I turned back. My legs didn't want to move at first. They felt locked at the knees, like something about watching it had rubbed off on me. I made myself walk, one step at a time. My hands trembled against the grip of my flashlight, even in full sun. When I reached the tower, I climbed the stairs and locked the hatch without thinking. My whole body was humming, nerves stretched thin. I leaned against the wall and waited for my heart to slow. It didn't. I didn't write anything down that time. I didn't want to describe it. I didn't want the details on paper where I'd have to see them again. That night, I slept with my boots on. I dreamed something knocked on the door but didn't want to be let in, just wanted to be acknowledged. And somehow, I knew that doing so, even in a whisper, was enough. I woke in the dark, heart pounding. For a moment, I thought the dream was still happening. But there was no tapping, no footsteps, just the tower creaking under its own weight. Still, I sat up and waited for the sound. It came later. Around 2 a.m., I heard it again. The footsteps, but they weren't circling this time. They approached, slowly. The gravel path crunched one step at a time, then paused, then another step. The pattern had changed. It wasn't even. It hesitated now. Like it was listening between steps, like it was adjusting. I crouched beside the window and peeked out, careful to stay low. The clearing looked empty at first, then I saw the figure, not far away this time, only 15, maybe 20 feet from the base of the tower, standing at the edge of the light. Arms still stiff but not perfectly still anymore. They twitched, almost imperceptibly, like they were trying to remember something. Like tendons misfiring behind the skin. Its head hung low again. The chin nearly touched the chest. I couldn't see its eyes. I never saw its eyes. I didn't move. The figure took a step, not toward the stairs, but slightly sideways, skirting the edge of the tower's foundation, slow and methodical. Another step, then another. It was circling again, but this time it stopped halfway, right beneath my window. I heard the gravel shift, then nothing, no retreat, no sound at all. I didn't dare look directly down. The silence dragged on until I thought I'd go mad. Then I heard it again, those same slow, deliberate steps, but this time they were farther away. I waited another hour before I moved, and even then, I didn't check outside. I sat with my back to the wall and stared at the hatch. I didn't sleep at all. The next morning, I found the prints again, but not in a full circle like before, just 5 or 6, ending right beneath the window. All of them identical. I swept them away, not because I wanted to hide them, but because I couldn't stand to look at them anymore. I stayed in the tower that day, no hikes, no scouting. I watched the woods for movement, but nothing stirred. The next night, the steps didn't come at all, but the stillness did. Even more complete than before, like the forest itself had gone deaf. No insects, no wind, the trees didn't move, and I realized something was different. Before, it had only come at night. Now I'd seen it during the day. It was changing something. Maybe it was getting closer. Maybe it didn't need the dark anymore. That thought made my chest feel hollow. I pulled the notebook from the drawer and turned to a blank page. My handwriting looked worse than usual, shaky, uncertain. I didn't care. I wrote, "Its arms don't move, but it still gets closer." Then I turned the page and sketched what I'd seen, the outline, the way it stood, how its chin dipped too far, like its neck had too many vertebrae. I stopped halfway through the drawing. I was afraid of finishing it, afraid that if I gave it too much detail, it would be closer when I looked out the window again. Instead, I set the notebook down and walked to the window. The clearing was empty. I turned and went to the hatch, checked the bolt, still secure. But something gnawed at me. Those pauses in its steps, That wasn't random. They weren't just for effect. It was adjusting, listening, calculating distance. And I remembered what Clyde said, how he never looked directly at it, how he never said its name, how he never told me more than what was necessary. Don't acknowledge it. I think I finally understood what that meant. It didn't need speed. It didn't need strength. It didn't need to chase me. It just needed me to react, to recognize it, to see it, because every time I did, it got closer. I waited 3 days before I tried to leave. I told myself I was gathering strength, waiting for a better weather window, watching for signs the figure had moved on. But the truth was simpler. I was scared. The silence had turned oily, unnatural. I could feel it sitting on my chest, just behind the sternum, like something coiled tight inside me. The forest didn't rest anymore. It loomed. I watched the trees sway in wind that didn't touch my skin. Sometimes they moved when the sky was dead still, like they were exhaling something thick and unseen. But the worst part wasn't the figure or the footsteps or even the tapping. It was the sense of familiarity that started creeping into everything. The same stones appearing on different trails. Fallen branches arranged in shapes I half recognized. The angle of light at midday hitting the tower floor exactly the same way twice in a row, down to the shadow it cast on my boots. I'd begun checking it with a watch. It always landed at 12:41 p.m. sharp, like the forest was on a clock of its own. I couldn't explain it, so I stopped trying. The day I chose to leave, I packed light, 2 protein bars, a water canteen, my sidearm, a flare, and the old map I'd traced from Clyde's binder. I strapped the compass to my wrist and marked a heading due west, toward a utility road that should have cut through the bottom of the range and taken me to the old ranger station. From there, if the roads weren't washed out, I could hike back to the trailhead where my truck sat baking under weeks of pine needles. The key was to keep moving. Keep quiet. Don't turn around. I stepped off the tower platform just after sunrise. The trees were thick with fog, low to the ground and slick against my legs. I moved slowly at first, marking my route with flagged branches and bright chalk on trunks, anything to prove I was making progress. An hour in, the forest seemed normal again. The chill had a bite, but I welcomed it. My nerves began to settle. I started to believe the worst of it was behind me. That's when I saw the same birch tree twice. It had a wide scar low on the trunk, shaped like a hook. I remembered marking it with a yellow chalk X maybe 20 minutes into the hike, and now here it was again. I stared at it, then checked the compass. Still west, still straight. The sun even looked right, angled through the canopy just like it should have been. I kept walking. 15 minutes later, I found the tree again. Same scar, same yellow X. This time the X had faded slightly, as if it had been sitting longer than it should have. I dropped my pack and sat on a stump, hands clenched. Something wasn't right. I'd taken a bearing. I'd marked my trail. I pulled out the map and traced my finger along the path I should have been walking. Even at a slow pace, I should have cleared the ridge and started descending, but I hadn't. The terrain hadn't changed. Then I saw it. Just beyond the tree line, maybe 30 feet away, a figure stood between 2 narrow pines. Still, watching. The arms didn't bend. I closed the notebook without looking again, stood, turned left instead of continuing west. Didn't matter where I went. I just had to move away from it. I walked for nearly an hour, turning whenever instinct told me to. I stopped marking trees. It wasn't helping. Every turn just made the forest feel smaller. When I finally paused again to rest, I heard water, a slow trickle, maybe a creek or a spring. I pushed through a thicket of fern and stepped into a narrow clearing lined with stones. It was the same clearing from before, the one with the hollow tree, the one where I found the bone, only now the bone was gone, and the hollow had been filled, stuffed with something I couldn't see, dirt, branches, cloth, like someone had tried to hide what was inside. I stepped backward, breath catching. Then I heard it, twigs breaking. Behind me. I turned. The figure was standing at the edge of the clearing just beyond the tree line. It didn't move, didn't tilt its head this time. It didn't need to. I couldn't see its face, but I could feel its attention, and it was patient. I backed out of the clearing and began running. Branches slapped my face, roots caught at my ankles. My breath turned ragged, my heart like a drum in my ears. I ran until my legs gave out. I collapsed beside a tree with a wide base and sat there panting, staring at the dirt. When I looked up, I recognized the stump beside me, the same one I'd sat on that morning. I was back at the tower. I could see it through the trees now, its frame rising against the fog, skeletal and lifeless. And at the base of the stairs, the figure stood motionless, facing the tower. It didn't turn as I approached. It didn't react. It just stood there, arms straight, back rigid, chin lowered. I stepped behind a tree and waited. I don't know how long I stood there, 20 minutes, maybe an hour. When I looked again, the clearing was empty, but I didn't go inside the tower right away. I walked around the base, slowly, checking for footprints. None. The ground was untouched. But on the far side of the foundation, I found something else. One of the trail cameras I'd installed a week ago. The metal casing had been ripped open like a tin can, wires dangling from the inside. I pulled the memory card and climbed back up the tower. It took a while to get the footage loaded. The only working device I had left was a rugged old tablet from the supply bin. I slotted the card and opened the viewer app. Most of the footage was normal. Wind, animals, leaves shifting. But then came the static, a burst of distortion in the middle of the night. The timecode was scrambled. The trees flickered. The image stuttered like broken film. Then, for a single frame, I saw it. The figure, right in front of the camera, closer than it should have been. Its head was bent. Its arms hung like dead branches. Its body was too straight, too symmetrical. Then the image cut out completely. The rest of the footage was blank. I deleted the file and ejected the card. That night, I didn't sleep. I didn't eat. I sat in the dark, staring at the woods through the slats in the window. The trees moved, but nothing else did. It was waiting again. I knew now that I couldn't leave. Not through the woods, not by trail. It wouldn't let me. It didn't have to chase me. It only had to rearrange the paths. I stopped marking the days. There was no point. The sun rose and fell, but it never brought relief. Food ran low. I rationed what I had left into uneven meals. Handfuls of trail mix, a mouthful of water, a cracked protein bar eaten over hours. I couldn't leave. The woods wouldn't let me. I slept in intervals, shifts, 2 hours at a time, curled in the corner of the tower's cabin with my back to the wall, a chair pushed against the door, even though I knew it wouldn't matter. The footsteps still came some nights, other nights silence. But the worst moments weren't when I heard it. They were when I didn't. Because that's when I knew it was closer. I stopped writing in the notebook. There was nothing left to say. It knew I saw it. It knew I knew. And yet it hadn't come inside. Not yet. It was waiting. I tried to remember everything Clyde had told me. Not much in the end. He'd kept things vague, distant, maybe out of guilt. Maybe because the fewer words you use, the fewer things it could learn from you. I thought about what else Clyde had done that I hadn't, where he might have hidden things. I turned the tower upside down, rifling through drawers, closets, under mattresses. Nothing. Then I remembered the trap door. It sat near the far wall, just beneath the backup supply shelf, metal framed, flush with the floorboards, rusted at the edges. I'd seen it the first week but ignored it. I assumed it was some old crawl space for wiring. I slid the shelf out of the way and knelt. The latch groaned as I pulled it open. Dust spilled out, thick and undisturbed. A wooden ladder led down into dark. I hesitated, then I climbed. The basement wasn't large, just a square dugout with wooden support beams and a packed earth floor. No lights, no generator hum, just stale air and the smell of old rot. I shined my flashlight across the walls, storage bins, broken tools, an old cot with a torn blanket, and something else, wedged in the corner behind a stack of cracked crates, a journal. It was smaller than mine. Black leather, the cover warped from moisture. No title. I pulled it open and flipped through. Dates, scrawled in blocky print. Early 1980s. Most of it was routine, bird counts, trail maintenance, weather conditions. But then the tone shifted. July 12. Saw someone in the trees today. Thought it was a lost hiker. Waved. They didn't wave back. Just turned and walked away. Funny walk. Arms stiff. July 13th. Heard footsteps last night. No one reported missing. Didn't sleep. July 15th. Still hearing it. No calls from base. Either signals down or no one's answering. Getting low on batteries. July 17th. Don't talk to it. Don't even look. Pretend it's not there. That's the only thing that seems to work. I think it watches how you move. That last sentence was underlined 3 times. I kept reading. July 20. It learns. I think it copies the motion, but it doesn't do it right, too perfect, like it's remembering instead of living. July 21. If you bend your elbow, it doesn't. That's how I know it's not human. Not even close. The final entry, written in different handwriting, shakier, frantic. It wants to know how to be me. I think it's waiting for me to move wrong, to bend too much, to give myself away. No signature, no name, just those last words, smudged at the edges like they'd been written with shaking hands. I sat on the cold floor and stared at the pages. My hands started trembling, and I realized I'd been holding my arm in the exact position I'd seen the figure use, down at my side. Unbent. I flexed my elbows slowly, just to feel the joint respond. The movement felt foreign, wrong, like something had been keeping it straight too long. I shoved the journal into my jacket and climbed back up. Outside, the light was dying, gray twilight spilling across the clearing. Long shadows stretched through the window slats. I walked to the mirror above the sink, then stopped. No mirrors. I grabbed the towel off the hook and covered it. Back at the desk, I opened my notebook for the first time in days and wrote one line. It doesn't know how to be human. It only knows how to be near it. And then, without thinking, I drew a figure, rough and hasty. A tall, long-limbed body, arms straight down, chin dropped, no face, just the outline. I closed the notebook before the pencil even left the paper. That night I turned off every light, covered every reflective surface, sat in the middle of the cabin with the flashlight off. I waited. At 2:08 a.m. the tapping began again, but not on the hatch this time, on the glass, not hard, not loud, just a single dry click, then another, then nothing. I didn't look, I didn't move. I sat until sunrise, every muscle locked. When I finally stood and peeled back the curtain, there were no prints, no signs of anything outside. Except the camera. It had been moved. The trail camera I'd recovered, the one I'd stashed in the storage bin, was sitting outside the front door, propped upright, facing in. I opened the hatch just enough to grab it and pulled it inside. It was cold, too cold for plastic, like it had been kept in snow. I slotted the memory card into the tablet and held my breath. The feed began like before, static, flickers, branches twitching in the dark. Then the camera shifted, suddenly pointed up at the tower. A shape moved across the frame, just the corner of something. A shoulder, an arm, too fast to tell. Then the image froze. The last frame showed the tower window, and me, sitting behind it, staring down. But I hadn't looked out last night, had I? The timestamp read 2:10 a.m. I dropped the tablet. The camera had been outside, recording me. And somehow, I had looked. I had seen it. Or it had seen me. The journal's words echoed in my head. It watches how you move. It learns. I paced the cabin until sunset. Couldn't sit, couldn't eat. My limbs didn't feel like mine anymore. My joints ached, not from injury but from disuse, like they hadn't bent enough in days. I caught myself keeping my elbows straight, shoulders square, chin slightly dipped. The posture was sinking in, becoming habit. I forced myself to pace with my arms bent, exaggerated, swinging them wide like a cartoon jogger just to feel something. But even that felt unnatural now. That night I heard it on the stairs, not the ground below, not the path, the stairs, metal creaking under slow weight. Then it stopped, right beneath the hatch. I stood at the edge of the trapdoor and stared down, waiting for a knock, a voice, something, but there was nothing, just silence, until the light bulb above me flickered, then died. When the bulb died, the silence that followed was absolute. I didn't move. The glow from the flashlight was off. I hadn't touched it, but the hatch at my feet seemed darker than it should have, like the space beneath it had swallowed more than light. The power was gone. I tried the wall switch, then the backup panel. Nothing. The radios remained dead. The tablet wouldn't boot. No hum, no charge indicator. I opened my pack and checked the spare batteries. Unresponsive. Cold. Everything electric had been drained, except the flare. One red flare, tucked into a torn nylon pouch near the base of the shelf. I hadn't touched it since my second week. I held it in my palm like a prayer. The stairs creaked again. No tapping this time, no slow circling, just the sound of metal groaning beneath deliberate weight. One step, then another, spaced evenly apart, no hesitation. I stepped back from the hatch and braced myself against the far wall, knees bent, sidearm drawn. My breath was shallow, unsteady. The noise stopped, not because it left, because it was standing still, right beneath the trapdoor. I could feel it. Not the weight, not the heat, but the attention. Like a second skin pressing against mine. I waited, every nerve wired for sound, but it didn't knock. Instead, I heard something shift in the trapdoor frame. Soft, a dragging sound. Fingertips, maybe, or something harder. The air felt wrong. Thick, stale, humid like a cellar too long sealed. I crouched and stared at the hatch. It pulsed faintly in the dark. Not physically, just wrong, like it belonged to something else now. I backed away, legs shaking. Then I heard the voice, not speech, not words, just sound. A scrape of throat, a lurching attempt at vocality, like something remembering that humans made noise with air. It wasn't a growl, it wasn't a moan. It was mimicry, half-formed, a strained hiss that rose at the end, like a question mark smeared across broken vocal cords. I snapped. I grabbed the flare and the notebook, slung my bag over my shoulder, and ripped the hatch open. The stairwell below was black, but I could see the shape at the bottom. Vague, tall, motionless, no reflection, no glint of eyes, just the outline of it, arms hanging, head tilted. It didn't react when I opened the hatch. It just waited. I lit the flare. The hiss of ignition was deafening. Red light exploded across the cabin, painting the walls in blood. I didn't think. I vaulted down the stairs, leapt the last 5 steps, and shoved past the shape without looking directly at it. The metal was slick where I touched the railing. Not wet, not cold, just slick. I hit the clearing at a full sprint. Branches clawed at my face. My knees buckled twice, but I didn't stop. I moved through the woods without a trail, without direction. Just away. Away from the tower. Away from the thing that had climbed toward me. The flare lit the trees in erratic flashes. Every twist of my wrist cast shadows in impossible shapes. For a moment I thought I saw the figure ahead of me, then behind, then at my side. But it didn't need to follow, because it had already seen how I moved. It knew what I looked like from above. It had been learning from the start. The path curved beneath me. Rocks blurred past. Roots snagged at my boots. Still I ran. Eventually the flare began to sputter. Red light blinked in and out, choking itself. In its last seconds, I raised the notebook to my lips and began recording. Not with a mic, not with a camera. With memory. With the last sane thought I might have. I don't know what it is, I whispered. It's not a man. It never was. But it's been watching, waiting. It walks like we do, but wrong. It wants to get close. The light faded to black. I stopped running. My legs wouldn't carry me anymore. I leaned against a tree and stared into the dark. I knew it was close. I knew it didn't have to chase me. It had never run. It just waited. Waited until I forgot how to be human, until my limbs went stiff from fear, until my elbows stayed locked, until I moved like it. I turned my head slowly. Behind me, I heard something take a step, a slow, even crunch. I didn't turn around, not at first. The step behind me had been light, too light, careful, as if testing the earth. My breath caught in my throat and I crouched lower behind the tree. My legs were shaking so violently that my knees throbbed. I raised the flare tube again, but I didn't strike it. The last one had burned out too fast and I only had one left. I waited. Nothing moved. And then, after what must have been a full minute of silence, I heard it again. Another step, slow, even, measured, exactly like before. I turned my head slightly, just enough to glance over my shoulder. The trees were still there, silhouetted in the night, unmoving. But something had changed. The spacing between them was different. The trunks felt too evenly spaced, too symmetrical, like the forest had rearranged itself into a corridor. At the end of that corridor was the shape, backlit by nothing, illuminated only by absence. It stood like it always did, arms straight, chin dropped, posture so still it hurt to look at. But this time, it was closer, much closer. I should have run. But something deeper than fear kept me rooted. Not dread, recognition. It had followed me this far without touching me, without speaking, without breaking pace. It never had to change its shape, never had to adapt. It just was. I turned away again and ran. Branches snapped at my shoulders. A thorn sliced through my sleeve. My legs burned. Every footfall sent a shock through my joints. I didn't know where I was going. The trail was gone. The landmarks meant nothing. The compass had stopped working days ago. Everything pointed inward now, back to the clearing, back to the tower, back to it. But still I ran. I don't know how long it lasted. Minutes maybe, an hour. Eventually my lungs gave out and I stumbled into a ditch, rolled once, landed in dead leaves. I stayed there, face in the dirt, listening. Nothing, no footsteps, no breathing, no wind. I looked up. There was a light in the distance, pale, steady. For a moment I thought it might be rescue, a ranger truck. A campfire, something human. I stood slowly, legs stiff and sore, and stepped toward it. But the closer I got, the more I realized the light wasn't coming from a source. It was just there, ambient, and in the middle of that glow, I saw a shape, the figure again, closer than before. But it wasn't just standing now, it was swaying, not walking, not stepping. Just a subtle shift from side to side, as if adjusting to me, calibrating. The sway was wrong, timed too evenly, not in response to wind or fatigue, but rhythm, as if it was mimicking a motion it had never understood. I reached into my jacket and pulled out the notebook. The pages were damp now, torn at the edges. I flipped to the last blank one and began writing. This is where it ends. I don't know how long I've been out here. I don't know how much I've lost, but I know this thing doesn't chase. Doesn't grab, doesn't hunt. It waits, it learns, it watches how you move, and when you stop moving like you're alive, it gets close. I stopped. My hands were shaking again. I took the flare and lit it. The red glow illuminated the trees like a siren. The figure was gone, the clearing was empty, but the sway was still in my head, still pulsing behind my eyes. I looked down at my own arms. They were straight, had been for hours. I bent them quickly, flexed my fingers, waved my hand like a reflex check, but it felt wrong, unnatural, as if my own body wasn't convinced. I pulled out the old field recorder, taped to the last functioning battery pack. I clicked it on and hit record. I heard my own breath first. Then I spoke. My name is... I stopped. What did it matter? It's out here, I whispered. Whatever this thing is, it's not a ghost, it's not a man. It doesn't come through walls, doesn't break doors. It doesn't even need to. It just waits for you to forget what a person is supposed to look like. A crack behind me. I turned, but the flare's light didn't reach far enough. Darkness pressed in. Not black, but red tinged, shifting like it was breathing. I kept recording. I thought I could get away, thought I could outwalk it, but I was wrong. You can't run from something that doesn't follow. I knelt down, holding the flare beside the notebook. I think it's been watching me since I got here, maybe longer. Maybe it was watching Clyde. Maybe he left before it could finish learning him. Maybe that's why I was next. More footsteps, slow, deliberate, from every direction at once. Not many, just one, but echoed. I spoke louder now, not for anyone else, just so I would remember. It walks like us, but it's too clean, too quiet. Its arms don't move, not unless it wants them to. It doesn't breathe, it doesn't blink. I paused. The flare hissed in my hand, and then I heard it. A click, soft, familiar, not in the woods, behind me, from the recorder. I turned it around and saw the light flicker, then fade, battery dead, all power gone. The flare went with it, just gone. No dying glow, no ember, just dark, no sound, no wind, no birds, just the sound of me, breathing alone, and then a second breath, not mine, right behind me.